I hereby introduce to you Mr. Michael Veazey.
Okay, ladies and gents, we're back with Jeremy Biron of Forecastly. Forecast is a very powerful tool for forecasting inventory, and that's one of the areas that gets neglected, I think, in people's research and their planning until you've been around for a while and you realize just how important it is not to either A, go out of stock continuously on a product and lose all your precious sale rank that you've spent so much money and sweat to acquire, or on the other hand, to tie your money up for months in something that just sits there, both of which I personally experienced and all my Amazon selling friends have as well. So very, very important stuff. Today, Jeremy, I'd love if we could focus on the seller who's a little bit more further into the game. They've got 5, 10, maybe 20 SKUs, in other words, product lines. And how do they use Forecastly, or how do they generally deal with forecasting across the board as a bigger picture function of their business?
Sure. An experienced seller really a lot of times values their time a lot more. And they realize more than their time, what's more expensive than their time is the stock out. So they realize how much a stock out is going to cost them. That's how they end up on a software platform. So you can do it in Excel, and Excel, since you've already purchased it, is free, right? Or is it worth $50 or $100 or $200 a month? Because if I run out of stock for 2 weeks, it's going to cost me $5,000 in lost profit. Well, I'll give you $200 right now if you're going to give me $5,000 in a month from now. So that's really what it comes down to as far as why somebody would choose a software versus trying to do it themselves. And then if you want to use a software, you just want to think about how is it actually making that calculation? And how is it different than just doing it myself, right? Some things that you can do if you have a database, a big database and crazy algorithms, as you can look at variability in demand and spikes in sales. And is my item going to have a spike in sales based on historical data, and how big is that spike going to be? If it runs out of stock, how much is it going to cost me? Can I rank my products? That's a really big one. I see a common mistake across experienced sellers, and I was guilty of it as well, is using the exact same replenishment algorithm across all of your items. Why are you going to use X percentage safety stock across all of your items if one item is making you $5,000 a month and another item is making you $100? I want to invest a lot more into my safety stock on that $5,000 in profit a month item so that it doesn't run out of stock, right? And that's a pretty common
makes sense. And your software will deal with what does it do? Sort of make a recommendation based on the profitability of your stock? I mean, what sort of things can Forecastly do for Amazon sellers? And give us a flavor of a few of the sort of results that you get from using it.
Sure. Our forte is demand forecasting. So it's kind of a replenishment forecast, no matter if it's your own or if it's a software's, if it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you're feeding bad data into that thing, then bad recommendations are going to come out on the other side. So we take a lot of pride in making sure that the data is right. All right, how many did you sell in the last X period of days? So let's just use 30 days, right? How many units did you sell? Was the product in stock for each of those days? If it wasn't, how many days were you out of stock, and would you have continued to sell that same number during that period of time? What is the variability of demand? You can't, and I spoke about that just a minute ago, but you can't do that in Excel. It's something that you can only do inside of a complicated software system. So what it does is, when we design Forecastly, I just wanted to know, what do I have to replenish? When do I have to replenish it? And how many units do I have to replenish, right? A lot of folks just say, I want to have 30 or whatever the number of days may be, but I want to have 30 days of inventory on hand. So as soon as they get down to 17 days, they reorder however many days they need to bring them up to 30, which is totally wrong, because now you're investing in a product that doesn't have to be replenished yet just to bring it up to that number. So what we do is we look at lead time and say, how long is that lead time? Based upon your current inventory, your inbound inventory, what you have in manufacturing right now, and then it makes a recommendation as to when do you need to make a purchase and how many units do you have to purchase.
So tell us a bit more of that tradition. That sounded like a sort of rule of thumb, which is actually leading people astray. So a lot of people say they want 30 days worth of of units in stock, and if it goes below there, they just automatically replenish. Is that right?
Sure. Well, let's use an example. Let's just say this is a common example for FBA seller, or excuse me, private label sellers. I want to have 90 days of inventory on hand at any given time, and my lead time's a month. So, and I place an order once a month. So in a month from now, I only have 60 days on hand, so I order another 30 days worth of inventory. Well, that product doesn't need to be ordered for another month because I only have a 30-day lead time on that. So now you're ordering inventory that doesn't really need to be purchased yet. So you're tying up cash. Now, a lot of folks will say, "Oh, well, you just want to make sure you don't have a stock out, so that's why that's why you do it." And it makes it for an easy algorithm, and we don't have a better way, so that's why we do it. That isn't a good excuse. And any experienced seller knows the value of cash. Like, cash is king. And if you don't have cash to invest in new products, it's going to slow your growth significantly. So that's why the value of when to reorder is more important and more difficult to calculate than any other piece of data.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And the value of cash is absolutely right. I mean, basically, you can't pay your bills with stock. If somebody doesn't want, I'm just looking around for random things, like doesn't want my magic blue pen, I can't really pay my suppliers in blue pens if all they want is dollars. So it's a very good point. So what is it that your system will do? I'm just trying to, I know you probably answered this question, but I'm trying to get it in sort of simple terms for people like myself that have a fairly primitive understanding of this area, and which explains a few things about my business. So what's the alternative to the sort of 90 days lead time? Your system will just basically give you a sensible lead time based on the actual, more realistic forecast of demand, including variability, a bit of safety margin for the lead time going wrong, that sort of stuff.
It'll give you a more accurate replenishment date than doing it the other way. And then it ties in a lot of stuff that I didn't touch upon. You can't just look at and say, all right, I might have a 75 or a 45-day lead time. You need to think about, all right, what is the likelihood of having a spike in sales, and then taking that into consideration when you're calculating that reorder point. It really is, and it's not the sole factor, but one of the main factors of having a stock out is having an incorrect replenishment date. A lot of tools that are out there, and just Excel and Amazon's own reports will say, oh, here's when you're going to run out of stock. You shouldn't have to do any manual math. And there's a lot more than just saying, oh, I'm going to run out of stock in 75 days and I have a 45-day lead time. I should order in 30 days. It's not that simple. That's why we pride ourselves in having the most accurate replenishment dates, which prevents stock outs.
It's certainly absolutely true. Now, you've just touched on the spike in sales. So how do you manage to, because it's certainly absolutely true. For example, if I generally sell 10 units a day in a stable sort of time of the year, say it's February, March, April, something like that. So Christmas isn't around the corner or something. And I calculate I need 300 units for a month. And then I suddenly have a few days where I sell 50 units a day. It's going to completely screw up my figures. But how do you do that? Is it relative to the the seller's own data, or is that drawing on your database of other Amazon sellers, or how is that calculated?
Two different things. Kind of what you explained as far as time of year, that's referred to as seasonality. And then variability of demand is usually tied to an individual product. So how often is it having a spike in sales? How large is that spike? And I can't get into too much detail because some of it is kind of black box algorithms, and a lot of it's over my head, right? I have data scientists on the team that know a lot more than I do as far as that's concerned. It's why our algorithm is extremely accurate.
Interesting. And so the variability that's tied to individual products, is that something where you need a certain amount of data? You need like 90 days data or half a year's data from the seller, or can you work with sort of shorter amounts of data?
No, you're going to get the most accurate forecast if you use kind of a mid-range period of time. If you use too long of a period of time, what happens is you're going to factor out, if you use 6 months worth of data, and I hear a lot of people, oh, I want to use 6 months worth of sales. That's going to factor out any trend, because if you're doing things right, you have an upward trend, right? And if you're using a 6-month historical period, you end up looking at too much data and you average too low. I really like a 30-day velocity number. So how many units did I sell in the last 30 days per day? And then go from there, and then tie seasonality data on top of that.
That's very interesting, and also what that ties in with the conversation I was having with Greg Mercer the other day about Jungle Scout, and you know, what it takes its data from, because a lot of people find that it predicts a bit too high and too low. And basically, I think it's based on, obviously, again, they have data scientists working for them, so it's a complicated thing. But broadly speaking, the sales rank, and the sales rank is updated pretty much hourly or sort of every few hours by Amazon. So that is going to make some slightly odd predictions as well. So what strikes me is that if you're going to be calculating inventory demands for the future and it's a new product, so you're using Jungle Scout as your starting point rather than your own data, you're going to have to take account of that as well, because if you 30 days data sounds like a nice solid number compared to every 4 hours it changes, you know.
Yeah, it will. And new products are very different, right? New products, you're just going off an estimate and you're assuming what your sales rank is going to be. So you got to be careful with your assumptions when you're forecasting for the future for a new product. But that's the only data you have to go on, because you have no sales history. I talk to a lot of sellers that want to use sales rank for an existing product. So, oh, well, it should take sales rank into consideration. No, it shouldn't. You're going to get the most accurate forecast if you use historical sales data. So how many units does it sell per day? We've looked at this across thousands of accounts, and we've seen it. So it just goes off of historical sales only.
Okay, very interesting indeed. That makes a lot of sense. But I guess once you've had the data to look at to prove that,
yeah,
that's a very, very important distinction, actually. So with new products, all you can go off is Jungle Scout, whatever research tool you're using. But with existing products, that is not the best idea. You need to take your historical data, and that will produce more accurate future prediction than looking at the sort of current state of play in, you know, with other existing products in the market, right?
Most definitely. And it is pretty cool that we have, don't get me wrong, I mean, it is pretty cool that we have tools like Jungle Scout to help us with a sales estimate, because I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, it was just a guess, right? You're absolutely guessing how many units you think you're going to sell during a given period of time. And the Jungle Scout crew has done an awesome job as far as putting together, trying to put together some accurate numbers for us. So we think, all right, if I'm going to sell at a 10,000 rank, here's how many units I think I'm going to sell.
Yeah, it's an amazing tool, but as you say, once you've got your own data, then you really should be using that for pretty much everything. And I think that's, yeah, from what you said, which is very, very key distinction for me, that's true for forecasting inventory demand as well. So really worth knowing. My final question, Jeremy, is a bit broader and approaches as you like from your own perspective. Obviously, you're an expert in inventory management, but you've also spent 10 years as a seller on the Amazon platform. Where do you see Amazon going in the next sort of 12, 18 months? And if relevant, how does that impact the forecasting of the inventory side of things?
Sure. Amazon as a company, I think you're asking, but Amazon it's always growing.
Company, you're right. It was a dumb question. Let me be more precise. How is it going to affect people who are private label sellers on Amazon FBA platform, which I think is majority of the listeners?
Sure. So a couple different things. Number one is Amazon's going to be growing their own private label brands. That is no secret. They did a tremendous job of that in 2016. So Amazon's now your competitor. That also kind of brings to mind of be careful who you give your supplier and cost data to. The other piece is the international markets are growing tremendously, and I've heard you on previous shows talk about this, so it's no secret. The European market is absolutely booming, and we've seen it across a lot of accounts. That market is hot, which is great. So private label sellers, as far as where they want to focus their time in 2017, if you are already doing really well in the US, you want to make sure to take those existing products and bring them over to the UK or the rest of Europe. There's I make it sound easier than it sounds, because there's a lot that has to happen. You need to, as you know, you got to take care of VAT, you got to take care of all your licensing, you have to get your product there, and then you have to have a replenishment strategy. So how am I going to get all of my stuff there on a continuous basis, even after your first shipment over there? But that market is great, and I think we'll continue to see a lot of the U.S. private label sellers move over to that market, or even the Canadian or Mexican markets.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Just to intervene slightly on the Europe side, that I've seen a lot of growth there. I've got products in the US and the UK and Germany specifically, and they are definitely growing. And I've started working with a couple of US sellers recently, exploring getting their products over and solving some of the problems for them of VAT and so forth. And they can be solved, but it is easier to get some help from somebody based in Europe, I'd suggest, because it's a little bit of a knottier problem in the US. But definitely there's a big opportunity there. And one other thing I'd say to any US based sellers is there aren't that many American sellers yet in Germany, but something like 40% of the sellers are non-German. So in other words, Germans are willing to buy from foreigners, but they're not buying from many Americans yet. So for me, that says, hello, opportunity, American sellers, if you can solve some problems.
Most definitely, and I agree with you. If you have someone that can help you out, that makes a world of difference, because that whole VAT situation it's not easy. It can be very confusing at first, and to have somebody that can guide you through that process, it's going to make life a lot easier.
Absolutely. So you came up with some very good points about Amazon growing their own private label brands and now becoming our competitor. What other things do you see coming down the pipe this year at Amazon that we're going to have to deal with as private label sellers?
It'll be interesting how things pan out with the amount of space at their facilities is running out, and they don't want to take a risk to just build hundreds. They're building a ton of warehouse space, but they can't overdo it, because eventually the bubble's going to burst or things are going to slow down. It's inevitable. So seller fulfilled prime we should see more growth there. It'll be interesting how that pans out. Can sellers really fulfill as fast as they need to fulfill? Is it going to be cost effective? To do 2-day shipping as a seller, for you to ship a product is going to be really, really expensive. So that'll be interesting to see how that pans out. And then, I think those are kind of the biggest points that I wanted to, or that I think of. It was Amazon growing their own brands, international expansion, and then, and the last piece that I wanted to talk about, or I think that is kind of, that comes to mind, is like the inbound process. So now we have to, we went from having to just slap a UPS label on to then you had to slap the UPS label plus Amazon's label, and now you have to give box contents. It's going to get more and more complicated. The inbound shipping process is a real nightmare. Amazon, and it's not necessarily their fault, Amazon misreceives a lot of inventory. You ship 1,000 units and only 750 show up. You wouldn't believe the number of sellers that don't reconcile their shipments, each and every one, and you absolutely have to. That's one of the things that we help with. We have a tool that helps you reconcile your inbound shipments and keep track of, did I reconcile this? Do I need to reconcile it? What is the value of the inventory that's missing? Hopefully that will start to clean itself up a little bit with the inbound, with the boxes and the box contents and that stuff.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeremy. There's some really great insights there. I think not only the private label brands thing, which you're flagging up with other people as well, and the opportunity of Europe, but also two things which I think are very related to the whole inventory side of things, which you're very, very plugged into, of course, and a lot of people aren't. So the space at facilities and the inbound process getting more complex, I think a part and parcel of Amazon sort of dealing with things internally. And it's very, very important that we remember that we're dealing with managing physical units, and that the flow of those units into and out of Amazon is not a sort of given and a sideshow, and that the marketing is the main thing, which I guess a lot of us, myself included, focus on, but that the whole inventory management side of things is part and parcel of a successful business. And I think you've really, really opened my eyes to several points today about that. And so it's very interesting, Jeremy, that you're predicting not that the the problems with getting inventory in before Christmas in the USA were just a blip, but actually that's becoming a systemic issue for Amazon. And so it's very wise for us to see that one coming. So yeah, thank you for some very, very concrete guidance on all that stuff.
I hope it was helpful. You brought up a good point. It's not the sexiest thing, right? Everyone wants to talk about marketing, but there is a lot of money to be made with your existing inventory. I mean, inventory management is most definitely not fun. It's not fancy, but there is more profit to be made on your existing account. And hopefully everyone found the tips helpful, and I really appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah, I'm sure that many, many people, particularly the people who are serious about this, will definitely be making some serious notes from this. And of course, you can go and read the notes at the blog as well as ever at amazingfba.com. Jeremy, if people want to contact more, get more information from you, or start exploring using Forecastly as a tool, where can they get hold of you?
You can find us online at forecast.ly. And then also, just to touch on that URL again, we're going to set up a URL at forecast.ly/amazingfba, and we'll put out that Excel tool for launching new products on there. And then you can always reach me at jeremy@forecastly.com.
Fantastic. Well, Jeremy, as you have guided us through the rapids of inventory, as you say, sexy or not, money's always sexy, right? And I think getting a handle on this is very, very important. It's something that I don't hear talked about enough. And you've given us some real gold nuggets today. So thank you very, very much, Jeremy, for coming on the show.
Hey, and thank you. I was happy to be here.
My pleasure.